Okay, how is everybody today? If I could get a real quick mic check before we get right into it. Okay, so just a little refresh from yesterday's stream. Yesterday we went through my fingering chart, uh, and we covered what I call the remedial, the basic, in the orchestral range. So this is a low B flat up to the high C sharp. Pretty much almost the entire orchestral repertoire is going to be included in this range. The only real reason to even attempt to expand beyond this range is if you want to have access to solo bassoon repertoire. So then you would want at least the D and probably the E flat, the E, and maybe the F as well. And then there's also some contrabassoon repertoire that extends beyond that. So today we're mainly going to be looking at the what I'm calling the altissimo register. So I've divided the altissimo register between the lower altissimo, which is I would consider from D up to A flat. This is a range that might be musically useful. Emphasis on might. And then the upper altissimo register, which is mainly just for goofing around and making weird noises, at least on a traditional contrabassoon. On a fast system contra or a contraforte or the Volter Kronbolt contra, this register might be more useful. But on a traditional contra, it's well, I'll be playing through some of it so you can get a better idea of what I'm talking about with the limitations and the reliability concerns. Now, one thing I did want to briefly touch on that we didn't get to, or that we talked about a little bit yesterday. So there were some questions about the harmonic overtone series. I kept on mentioning harmonics. So on any kind of on a string instrument, a woodwind instrument, the vibrating media, be it a column of air or a string, doesn't just vibrate in as a whole. It vibrates in subsets of that whole. So it vibrates in halves and thirds and quarters and fifths. And on woodwinds, brasses, and strings, there are ways to suppress the let me be careful. There are ways to force the instrument to play only these harmonics. So, for instance, if I'm playing a low C on a generic instrument, there are things I can do to cause it to play the C an octave higher, the G an octave and a fifth above that, the C 2 octaves above that. And that's going to vary by instrument. So on bassoons, contrabassoons, clarinets, clarinets are a little bit different, oboes, saxophones, this is done by the opening of vents. These aren't designed to function as tone holes. They're designed to divide the air column so that to produce one of these harmonics. Now, brass instruments tend to operate somewhere between like the 2nd and the 12th harmonics. The 12th is kind of pushing it, but the horn and some lead trumpet stuff can get up that high. Whereas woodwinds, we tend to stay down in the 1st through 6th harmonics. Now, in a perfect situation, contrabassoon fingerings might look something like this. So down here at the bottom, we have our first harmonic, the fundamental. And these would be our basic fingerings. So the contrabassoon has holes for F to F. And then some other lower notes that usually wouldn't be used in overtones. And then we could divide those fingerings in half to get the octave higher, divide those fingerings in thirds to get a 12th above that, 2 octaves and a major third, 2 octaves and a fifth, so on and so on. But like we talked about yesterday, it's not nearly that simple because the harmonics on reed instruments are not terribly well in tune, especially on bassoon and contrabassoon. So as we get higher, both as we go up the harmonic overtone series and as we go up the fundamental scale, these notes are going to tend to get sharper. And what often happens is it gets sharp enough that it's easier to use fingerings that are a half step or even a whole step offset from what they theoretically would be based on this idealized chart here. Okay. Now, one other thing I did want to mention is I said before that this lower altissimo register is usually doesn't occur in orchestral music, and that is 99.9% of the time the case. There are a few exceptions. The most well-known is the John Adams Chamber Symphony goes up to a high D, and that does occur in auditions every once in a while. There are some even more extreme examples. So this is an excerpt from Moses und Aaron. This is Schoenberg's opera. It's not something that you're likely to perform. And this particular excerpt hasn't appeared on any auditions I've seen, but it might only be a matter of time. So we have this wonderful, ridiculous minor ninth leap from high F down to E. Now, I should stress that this is from the stage in Schoenberg's career where he got a little bit loose with his orchestration. Later on in this piece, there's a low A flat for the second bassoon. So I think it would be very reasonable to say that, did I say Strauss? I meant Schoenberg. It would be very reasonable to say that that's unreasonable. Schoenberg, just made a mistake, whatever. And as long as that's doesn't show up on an audition, we can say that. But the moment this starts showing up on auditions, we have to deal with it. And the only other example I know of in the orchestral repertoire that goes up in this range is from the Tandun's Water Concerto. And this is one of the most absurd things I've ever seen on contrabassoon, because it doesn't just go up to this register. It expects you to play mordents up here. Yeah, high D to high E mordent on contrabassoon. And then to top it all off, there's a high E flat to high F mordent I don't even know on that one. Yeah. Not pretty, and if any composers are out here, I would not recommend following these examples, but for contrabassoonists, do be aware that they exist. They're floating around out there ready to terrorize someone. Okay, so let's get back to the fingering chart. And so we're going to start with D. So the best fingering I found for D is a fourth harmonic of C sharp with some added fingers in the right hand to stabilize it and bring the pitch down. And even though it's a fourth harmonic, because we're dealing with the contrabassoon here and the bassoon family, it's not an in tune fourth harmonic. It's actually 2 octaves in a minor second. Okay. And you can hear there, when I get into this register, I would personally consider articulation is... The correct articulation in this register is whatever articulation you need to get the note to speak. A lot of times in this register, I'm not trying to do a correct articulation, a da, a nice clean articulation with the tongue at the beginning of the note. I'm doing the kind of the articulation just to help the note speak. Once again, we're not a bassoon. We don't have a high D key specifically put on the instrument to help this harmonic speak. So right there, I wasn't tonguing that. I was going... If I try to do a very clean tongue, it might happen. But it didn't. So the other fingering I know of is, I guess it's probably a fourth harmonic. I guess it's another fourth harmonic, but this time of D. The problem is, so the fingering is just the second finger, and that's it. Well, now it's not working. But in addition to being more hesitant to speak, it's also very sharp. And I have actually found that this fingering, as weird as it looks, tends to work on a decent number of contrabassoons. All right, moving ahead to the E flat. This fingering here is a little sharp. But once again, I tend to prefer fingerings that are a little high so I can voice them down as opposed to fingerings that are flat and then having to pinch them up. And actually, real quick, sorry, let's go back to D. You'll see here there's something that says Appendix B. So if we go down to Appendix B, what we're going to find is... Here, let me switch to the other copy. Where was I? Okay. So So, no, here we go. So, Appendix B is about the half-hole mechanism that I was talking about yesterday. This automatic mechanism that vents this tone hole here in certain situations to help produce different notes. So high D is very sensitive to the adjustment of this mechanism. So depending on how your contrabassoon is set up, high D may not speak at all. And if the instrument's not yours, if it's the university's, then you might have to just be content with that. Now, it so happens on my contrabassoon that the adjustment that helps high D speak also helps the rest of the instrument. So that works for me. But if you have any questions about this mechanism, how it works, what adjustment you might try to make, assuming it's your own contrabassoon, Appendix B would be the place to go. Okay. So back to E flat. Now, I don't have it listed on this chart, but there is another fingering for high E flat I sometimes use. So the fingering I have here works very well as a slur from D. But for an articulation out of nowhere, what I like to do is, or what I often need to do is leave off the low F key and add the second finger of, or the third finger of the left hand. So what that does is that gives me a more secure response. It's handy if you need to articulate a high E flat or pick it out of nowhere. There's a very good example in Brett Newton's Contrabassoon Concerto that I haven't been able to perform yet, but there's this passage here where there's a high D sharp picked out of nowhere. So yeah, that's the fingering I use in that situation. It's flatter, but that's helpful when you're having to tense, to pinch to get the note to come out. Now E and F, for the longest time I just assumed that E and F were not possible on this contrabassoon. But eventually I found some tricks. So someone asked before about the water key. I think they were answered in chat, but this is just the key on the tuning slide. It's not designed to be used for actual notes, but it does work for some. E is a good example of that. So if I do this fingering, the first fingering for E that I have, 1, 2, E flat, C sharp, 1, 2, 3, it's not going to speak. I can slur to it from E flat or D. But I can't articulate it. So if on this particular instrument, if I add the water key to that fingering, and you can hear the beginning of the note sounds pretty atrocious. So that's why I don't leave the water key down, because you get that horrible, somewhat multiphonic. So on this instrument, once again, because the contrabassoon is not designed to play up here, I press the water key at the beginning of the note, then let go. And once again, I'm able to do that because I have this extension on here, so that I can more easily, so I can reach the water key with, I can press the water key and the second finger at the same time. On a lot of contrabassoons, there are fingerings for high E that don't require shenanigans with the water key, but not on my instrument. Yes, Kian, that's exactly right. So I use the water key like a flick key. I also, on the other notes that I use the water key on, on the A below that, I also will flick that sometimes. Now that's not on E, I let go of the water key to improve the sound. On the A below that, the water key doesn't negatively impact the sound, so I'll usually leave it down. But if I need to get my my right hand in a position for another note, then I will let go of the water key early so that I can, get my hand situated for the next note. Now the other two fingerings for E flat are just they're the same fingering, except one's using front E flat and one's using thumb E flat. They're going to work exactly the same, which isn't to say they're going to be perfect, but they're going to be exactly the same as one another. Now, the high F, once again, on this particular instrument, if I add the water key, so this is a sharp fourth harmonic of E. If I add the water key, that note comes out reliably and comfortably. Except for when I'm streaming. I think I had the... If I let go of the water... Now, unlike E, if I let go of the water key early here, the note fails. The only fingering I've found that doesn't require the water key is the second fingering here, which is essentially a slur fingering from E. Which I would really consider more of a trill fingering. In fact, on the next version of the fingering chart, I might just get rid of this fingering and keep it so that it's just in the trill section. Now, so with the addition of those four notes, that means that the bassoon, or the contrabassoon, has access to even fairly advanced bassoon repertoire, or bassoon etudes. So for most purposes, C sharp is more than enough. F is icing on the cake, and anything beyond that is just, if you're looking to be crazy. Now, there are two fingerings that I have listed for F sharp here. They vary in intonation and how reliably you can articulate them. So this first fingering here, it came out, but in order to get it to come out, I pinched it enough so that it actually ended up as a G. So this is more of a slur fingering. So if I'm coming from F sharp, I guess I should probably. The second fingering sorry, that was the first fingering. The second fingering is the one I would use in the unlikely event that I need to articulate a high F sharp. I'm pinching that, but it's a flatter fingering, so I can pinch it and keep it in tune. Now, this reed is not doing well on G and A flat. You can hear it try to come out. I'm going to switch to a different reed, see if that helps. So that was the G and the A flat. Now, throughout all of these notes in the lower altissimo, as I said before, you kind of have to accept what you can get as far as articulation. Some notes you can slur, some notes you can't. Some notes you have to slur. Some notes you can only slur from certain other notes. Now you might be able to hear. I'm gonna play from F sharp to G real quick. So what you might have heard there is there was that little blip. And normally, so on when you're playing in the normal range, the goal is for all of your fingers to move at exactly the same time, right? If I'm going from B flat to D, my goal is for, this is normal B flat to D. My goal is for all four of those fingers to move at precisely the same time. Now, of course, it doesn't really, exact doesn't exist. You know, one of those fingers is moving slightly before the others. It's just they're close enough together that we don't really notice it. Now, when we get into this extreme register, what we can find is that some notes, some of the inconsistencies in this register has to do with the harmonic is so perilous that if one finger moves slightly too soon, the entire thing fails. If another finger moves slightly too soon, it's fine. Now, so if I'm going from F sharp to G, I happen to know that if my left hand changes first, it fails. If my right hand changes first, or it's at the exact same time, it's okay. So a lot of times in this register, I'm purposefully messing up and adding the right hand just a split second sooner to make sure that that the errors in the direction that causes the note to still come out. Wow. As opposed to the direction where it fails entirely. Now, that A flat, at least on a traditional contrabassoon, is the absolute limit of what I would consider potentially usable in a performance situation. Everything beyond that, we're entering the realm of experimentation. I guess I should say I consider A flat the limit of what's potentially musical or musically useful now. If that may change in the future, with, if people are able to take this fingering chart and figure out something better and actually make this range usable on a traditional contrabassoon, that's why I included these fingerings. Not to suggest that composers should be writing up here and that bassoonists should be trying to practice up here because it's going to be helpful somehow. Now, and I've actually kind of changed my mind a little bit for this register since I've started, or since I made this fingering chart. My initial goal here was to be able to play up to like E flat without having to put my teeth on the reed. So, of course, if anyone's, not terribly familiar with bassoon, on bassoon, we would cradle the reed between our lips. It's so, unlike a clarinet, where you're going to put your top teeth on the mouthpiece, since we don't have a mouthpiece, we have a reed, we're going to use both lips on the reed. Now, you can use your teeth on the reed, and it sounds pretty bad. But in some of these extreme notes, it's necessary or helpful. Now, I say I changed my mind because I think I've come around to the idea that it's not worthwhile to try to play A, B flat, B, C without your teeth on the reed. I'd be happy to be proven wrong, but that's where I'm at right now. So, for instance here, where I say that this fingering must be pinched up to pitch, it's actually reasonably in tune, if slightly sharp, if your teeth are on the reed. Now, it doesn't sound good, but it comes out, and if you're writing for this, or if you're playing this register on contrabassoon expecting it to sound good, I think you're probably going to be disappointed. Let me try to play that note without my teeth on the reed. And the B flat above that is even flatter, and I would personally consider the B flat unplayable without teeth on the reed since I've written this fingering chart. So now the next part of the fingering chart, C, C sharp, D, and E flat, with that in mind, I'm going to consider outdated. Because these fingerings are only in tune if your teeth are not on the reed. And I'm going to say right now that this probably isn't going to work with these reeds. So I'm going to try to play this high C without teeth on the reed. Alright, so the C kind of works, but you have to just really be, you're walking on a knife's edge. And it kind of sounds like a knife edge too. But if I use that fingering with teeth on the reed, it comes out more reliably, but it's also a quarter step sharp. So, so these are the fingerings that I would consider replacements. These are, I guess, what I would now consider the best, or the least terrible fingerings. Once again, all of these are assuming teeth on the reed. And that E flat really wants to fail. And really only the C and the C sharp I can start on. If I try to start on the D, it's not going to happen. Now, you might notice my embouchure looks a little weird there. So normal playing position on contrabassoon and bassoon would be with your top lip or your bottom lip pulled in further. So your top lip is dampening the reed more than your bottom lip. And that impacts the angle we keep the instrument at, the angle the reed enters the mouth, the angle of the vocal. For these really high notes where I need my teeth on the reed, if my teeth are offset, like my top teeth are on the reed further than my bottom teeth, it's not going to work. So I need to kind of change my angle so that my teeth are parallel on the reed. Now there's one note that I missed here, and that's that high B. I'll be honest, I don't have a fingering for that high B at the moment that can be played with your teeth on the reed. This fingering is quite sharp even without teeth on the reed. See if I can get it to come out. So that's about 40 cents sharp. With your teeth on the reed, it's closer to a C. Yeah, that's a C that's 30 cents flat. So I don't have a a good suggestion here. Now this, I should say, the C does tend to be the most reliable note in this register without teeth on the reed. So you could possibly say that, well, you need teeth on the reed for A and B flat, but then for C you need to not have teeth on the reed so that you can get to the B. Unfortunately, going back and forth between teeth on the reed and teeth off the reed is not really... You can't really make that switch easily. And then we have the utter nonsense. These notes here. I've only been able to play these notes with teeth on the reed. Please bide or take literally extremely difficult and unreliable. The most reliable I found is the F. Yeah, and the position of your teeth on the reed matters. So for C, my teeth are a little further on the reed, closer to like what I would consider a comfortable playing position. F, they're closer to the tip. And G, quite close to the tip. And you heard there, I was too close to the tip, and it shot up to like a C sharp or something. Okay. Yeah. So once again, just to stress, I don't consider these notes as useful. I don't think that they're anything people should be stressing over. But, you know, for everything, high D on bassoon used to be that way. You know, like this terrible thing that, you know, sure you can technically do, but why would you want to? Now it's a pretty standard part of the bassoon repertoire. I personally don't think that these notes will ever be useful on contrabassoon, but I'm not willing to rule out the possibility entirely. Now, I'm not going to go through the next page is all trill, or the next section is all trills. And I'm not going to go over all of these. In fact, I'm not going to go over most of them. Because for the most part, contrabassoon trills they're either basic fingerings. So, for example, you know, low D to low E. That's just the normal fingering. There are a couple of trills that I think are going to warrant mention. So E to F sharp. This trill actually does occur in Mahler 5. There's this passage. It's descending down from E sharp to F sharp trill to a E to F sharp trill, and on you can't really trill by sliding your thumb back and forth between the low E and the F sharp key. There are two possibilities I know of for this trill. One of them is a little bit weird, but it involves using your heel to close the low E pad while trilling the F sharp key. But unfortunately, in the setting, that would require you to coordinate your your foot to close that key. The fingering I have listed here takes advantage of a mechanism of the contrabassoon that automatically closes the low E key anytime you have the upper or the lower octave key pressed. And this is to improve the tone quality in some of those A, B flat notes that use the lower octave key, but we can abuse that by using the lower octave key to close the low E key while trilling the low F sharp key. The only thing we have to be careful about is, since we're adding an octave key, if we're tense at all, we risk jumping up to a higher partial. This is also, depending on how much exercise your thumb has gotten, this might also be useful in Rite of Spring. You know, there's that long section where the two contrabassoons are just playing the E to F sharp over and over and over and over again. You could play the E with the lower octave key, but once again, there's a little danger there that the note's going to crack because you're opening an octave key. So I don't really know that I recommend it, but that trick of using the lower octave key for low E has other applications other than just this one trill. Actually, so while we're on the topic, if any of you are a contrabassoonist and there's a trill you've come across that you weren't able to find a solution for, go ahead and share that in chat, and we'll see if we can find one. Now, one fingering that I am actually pretty darn proud of, because it took me forever to find, is this one here. So B to C sharp. Now, this was in an audition once. I think the Houston Symphony was having an audition, and they wanted to hear the slow movement of the Vivaldi E minor concerto, which includes B to C sharp trills. And on a normal contrabassoon, the trill fingering you would use on bassoon of just trilling the third finger doesn't work. It's closer to a D. And just trilling the C sharp key doesn't work. It's closer to a C. Eventually, I found this fingering here, which is essentially B flat with the C sharp key, and then trilling fingers 1 and 2. In both octaves. Yeah, so that was not an intuitive fingering to find. Moving on. Okay, so on bassoon, we have a trill key specifically for E to F sharp. Right here. And that is on some contrabassoons, but it's not standard like it is on bassoon. This contrabassoon doesn't have one. So the fingering I found is, once again, taking advantage of the fact that this lower octave key closes the low E key. So I'm going to start on the regular fingering for E, then slur to thumb F sharp, but with the lower octave key. Wait, what's going on here? Oh, that's why. I didn't have the low F key down. E doesn't sound great because you normally would never play E as a second harmonic from low E. But in this situation, without the front trill key for E to F sharp, it's the best fingering I've found. So these are all pretty basic. Now up in the upper register, we get into some notes where it is helpful to kind of be thinking about harmonics, because sometimes you end up using a harmonic other than the one you might use by default. So take for example this fingering for an E to F sharp trill here. Now it's narrow. I mean, upper register contrabassoon trills, I think intonation imperfections are going to be expected. But so what you're actually doing there is you're playing F sharp the normal way, which is a third harmonic of B, but you're playing the E as a third harmonic of A instead of the normal way, which would be a second harmonic of E. And the E is sharp and the F sharp, well, the distance between that is less than a whole step, but once again, in this register, I don't know of a better possibility. Looking through here, see if there's anything else worth mentioning. Now, the one fingering I don't have a good solution for is high C to high D. So I have a fingering here, but it requires going back and forth between one finger and 2 and 3. So it's a very precarious trill fingering. And it's hard to do fast. I think with an E to F sharp trill key, this might work by fingering high C sharp and trilling this, or high C and trilling this key. But once again, I don't have that key. And we get into this range. I haven't been able to find whole step trills up in this register. These notes are so precarious to begin with that expecting a whole step trill is not really reasonable. So the next part of the fingering chart, or the appendices, are an overview or more background information. So just real quickly, Appendix A is all about key work variants. So a lot of times contrabassoons are being played by people who didn't purchase that contrabassoon. You know, people who were playing the university's contrabassoon or an orchestra's contrabassoon. So they may not be familiar with some of the weird key work that someone has added over the years. So this is just an overview. So there are 5 different E-flat keys listed here that appear on some instruments or another. You know, 3 different C-sharp keys. The thumb A-flat, which isn't standard. Some information about the F-sharp tone holes. E to F-sharp trill key, low A. And also some information about what's called the divorced E mechanism. So what the divorced E mechanism alters that automatic mechanism we were talking about that closes the low E key, or it closes the tone hole closed by the low E key when the lower octave key is pressed. The divorced E mechanism changes that somewhat. Then there's this alternate upper octave key that I have on my instrument that I use by default. Some information about the standard contrabassoon octave system, and then some discussion of the more complex options out there. So the middle octave key, which on some contrabassoons is useful for C sharp, D, and E flat. Some contrabassoons have a special octave key just for G instead of the half hole vent. And then there's the fast system and the contraforte. Appendix B is once again about the half hole mechanism. Appendix C is about this extension to the water key, which probably doesn't apply to almost anyone else, but I included that just in case it's helpful to anybody. Appendix D is about my my original low A extension, just made from a cardboard mailing tube, cut to length and then cut a wedge out. And then Appendix E is completely impractical, but I included some dimensions for the really low extensions that I made back before I had bells for A flat, G, F sharp, and F. And that's my fingering chart. So before we end, if anyone has any contrabassoon related questions, now's the time. So Kian asks if I have any solo pieces for Contra I'd recommend. There are a decent amount. If you go to my YouTube channel, or if you search on my YouTube channel, there's I did a contrabassoon recital, and there was some pieces in there. Let me. So there's this piece here, which I thought was a lot of fun. Has a great name, "The Machine Who Longs to Be Human." And get to go all the way up to this top, or the normal high C, not the crazy high C. There's also and I'm going to be talking about some lesser known pieces. There, I think there's a piece called Oak Demon that's very popular that I haven't personally played yet. Where is there's a Contrabassoon Sonata by a German composer named Matthias Hutter, who I liked. A piece that I liked quite a bit. I think I ended up doing the premiere recording of it. And yes, Brett's not. I guess Brett's correct. All contrabassoon solos are lesser known by default. And we already, of course, talked about Brett's Contrabassoon Concerto that, to my knowledge, hasn't been recorded yet. Is that correct, Brett? Yeah. Yeah, so that's a handful of lesser-known pieces that might be worth looking at. Okay, well, I'm not getting any more questions, it looks like. So, I think we're going to call that a stream. Thank you all for coming on this weird experiment of streaming a fingering chart. And also, thank you all for going over this with other people. Has given me some ideas on how to improve it. And I do plan on coming out with a revision here probably in this summer. So I hope everyone has a great day. Stay safe, and I'll see you later.